Hello, everybody, and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm back! I'm really excited. Thank you so much, Jared and Liam, for just crushing it while Alex and I were out of town. Anyways, a reminder that I'm Serge.
They might have forgotten.
Back from that thing. It's been a while, but hello again, everybody. Joining me, as always, is Jared and Liam, the hosts with the most, who've been just rocking it for the past couple weeks.
100% attendance rate.
Yeah. No, right. You guys haven't missed anything yet.
Correct.
Wow.
Technically, Liam... No, you didn't miss one.
Did not.
You were going to miss one, but then didn't.
Correct.
Amazing, amazing. I'm a slacker here. Thank you very much, friends. And a reminder that North 100 is brought to you by you with your support at the Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. Well, let's get back into the traditional swing of things with the best card you're not playing, and up today is me. I want to talk about Assemble the Legion. This is one of my favorite cards to play in the archetype that we're going to be talking about today, which is Prison. Bear, 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 bear. Why is no one else celebrating?
The air horns, they're dead, actually. They're locked out.
Oh, really? We moved on past air horns?
Well, no, the power supply got locked out by the prison.
Oh, okay. No, that's fair.
You got rid of all my mana, so I can't make air horn sounds.
Assemble the Legion is a 5-mana enchantment for 3 and red and white. It has the following text. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a muster counter on the Legion. Then put a 1/1 red and white soldier creature with haste onto the battlefield for each muster counter on Assemble the Legion.
Muster counter, one of the more exciting types of counters.
Yeah, not mustard, less delicious, but still good.
Yeah.
I love this card as a win con in Prison decks for 2 reasons. 1, it's an enchantment, it's hard for them to get rid of. 2, it's an enchantment, so it doesn't die to your own wrath. And 3, it's an enchantment, so when you wrath your own Academy Rector, you get to put it into play. It attacks, it protects. This card does everything.
Don't forget 4, it's an enchantment, so all your tutors find it.
And all your tutors find it. Yeah, very, very solid on that. I don't know. I don't think this card is an auto-include in a lot of lists. I think it's very powerful, and people, you know, it definitely sees play in a lot of other formats, but if you're looking at 5 drops in Highlander, you might not consider Assemble the Legion, but I think this is, as the segment says, the best card you're not playing.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Assemble is that it requires you to get to 5 mana and for the game to go long, which is something Prison is great at.
Loves it.
But a lot of other decks are not.
Well, the amazing thing with Assemble the Legion is this ends games. It will end games.
Yeah, totally.
It like, even after turn 3, when you're cracking in for 6, they're like, holy moly.
Turn 3 of Assemble the Legion, right?
Yeah,
we're not just like Lotus, Mox, Assemble.
If you're starting with this in play, you know.
Right.
After
Leyline of Assemble the
Legion. After your Karn ultimate, you know, which is another valid win con for Prison. All right, let's talk about today's theme. Spoilers, it's Prison. We are talking about my favorite pet archetype, that feel-good archetype where both you and your opponent don't do anything, but you're doing slightly less. Your favorite and mine, the Prison, also known as Tax and Pox, and that's, I mean, I'm kind of fuzzing it together there, but the sort of attrition and lock style game. And Jerry, you want to start us off with a rough definition?
Yeah, so to me, Prison is sort of like a subset of Control. It's a tap-out proactive control deck.
Okay.
And so what I mean by that is you're not reactively answering your opponent's threats, you're proactively trying to make it so their threats either don't matter or they can't cast them.
Yeah, totally fair. Mm-hmm. We're going to use the word attrition a lot because that's sort of how these decks get there. And I've broken it down into sort of 4 different ways. There's hand attrition, land attrition, creature attrition, and converted mana cost attrition. And I think that's a pretty good way to look at that subject and stuff like that. When we talked about, I mean, hand attrition is probably the one that's the most straightforward. Hand attack. Make it so that they can't cast any spells because they never have anything in hand. So a great example of that, sort of in the Pox theme, is the card Smallpox. And actually, I mean, that's not just hand, that's everything we're looking at. That should have been the conclusion.
I mean, this sort of, encapsulates a lot of the sort of prison-y aspects.
So Smallpox is a card for black that says each player loses a life, discards a card, sacrifices a creature, and then also sacrifices a land. I don't know, with the hand attack stuff like that, it's... Since there's so few instant speed hand attacks, like getting to that point of the game where they don't have anything in hand is always kind of neat.
Yeah. I think one thing that's kind of interesting too about these attrition types is that generally in Prison, And in Magic broadly, many of the cards that are going to generate this kind of attrition are symmetrical.
Yeah.
And Prison a lot of the times is about breaking the symmetry on those kinds of cards.
Yeah.
So it's quite hard to discard your opponent's entire hand while keeping a hand yourself.
Yeah.
So instead, when you're using a card like Liliana of the Veil,
Or Smallpox.
you have to find ways in your deck to make it so that you don't mind
Yeah.
any cards in hand, right?
That's a deck building thing. I think one of my favorite locks, and so before the episode, when I proposed the idea of Prison, Liam told me he was going to put together a list of all the janky Prison locks and see how many I bring up. So I'm going to start with one of my favorite ones, which is a hand lock, and that is Chains of Mephistopheles.
I know the second card.
Me too.
So Chains of Mephistopheles is a 2-mana black enchantment where, let's see what words, which words the card's using here. So for 1 and a black, it says, if a player would draw a card except for the first one he or she would draw in their draw step each turn, that player discards a card instead. If the player discards a card this way, they draw a card. If the player doesn't discard a card this way, mill one. I think I got close enough on that. I got to the point.
Yeah.
And the second lock piece of this is a card called Anvil of Bogarden, which is a 2-mana artifact that reads, each player discards their discard phase. During each player's draw phase, they draw an additional card and then discard a card. And because I'm going to butcher it, Jer, can you tell me how the lock works?
Yeah, so after you draw the card in your turn, Anvil triggers.
Mm-hmm.
So then you would draw another card, but it's affected by the replacement effect of chains. So you discard, then draw, then you have to discard to Anvil.
Yeah. So what this does, if you have these 2 cards in turn, if you don't have more than 1 card in hand, you will never be able to draw an additional card. So if you have 1 card in hand, your turn goes draw, discard, discard, and you still just have 1. You can sort of filter through it, and if at any point you're in top deck mode, you will never get to draw a card. You're instantly discarding it, and there's no window of time in between where you can cast an instant or something like that.
There is in response to the Anvil trigger.
Oh, really? You have the first card and you can respond to it?
You draw, and then Anvil triggers.
Okay.
So I'm 90% sure it's a trigger.
Each player. Yeah, we'll go with that for now. We'll see. I mean, they'll let us know down in the comments and stuff like that.
I think it's like Howling Mine.
Yeah.
That's how it looks to me, but with these old cards, you can never be sure what the actual Oracle text is.
The word little errata and stuff like that. So I think, oh man, I'm overwhelmed. There's so much I want to talk about in Prison and stuff like that. So the draw. Let's move on to the next type, land attrition. And I think this is the part that players are most familiar with. You know, strip mine, wasteland, or the extra spicy, black sorcery,
Sinkhole, Dust Bowl.
Yeah, there are so many effects that you can use to destroy a land that your opponent controls, and often at the cost of one of your own.
Mm-hmm.
How do I want to move on from that? I mean, the biggest issue I've always...
You want to talk about the bigger ones too, like Wildfires, Armageddons.
Moving all the way up, yeah. There's a couple different ways Prison strategies can utilize the land lock. One is sort of a grindy attrition style, which is normally a green base. So they'll use Crucible of Worlds or Life from the Loam, and they'll trade 1 for 1. And they'll slowly start to try and grind you out of mana while bringing their own side. And then there's a more ramp style land lock, which is red-white based. You know, they'll ramp up to Wildfire or Armageddon and lock you out that way, which is... I want to say great, but that's not... I'm like trying to rein back my language here.
To go back to what Liam was saying in how these decks are breaking symmetry, the green-based decks are looking to play additional lands in order to break the symmetry, because otherwise they're not advancing their own game plan while just trading 1 for 1. So they play cards like Exploration, Fast Bond, the creatures that let you play an additional land, so they're able to wasteland or strip mine you and play an additional land. And the decks that are playing Armageddon and Wildfire are playing lots of artifact mana, typically, so that once a bunch of lands are gone or all the lands are gone, then they're able to still operate and function, at least at a minimal level as opposed to not at all.
Another type of attrition is creature attrition. This is fairly standard. You see this even in control decks, which is make the board as hostile a place for creatures as possible.
Yep.
So, low game, while you can do Pyroclasms, and then you get into effects like Wrath of God, and finally, my favorite are the Tabernacle that attacks type effects. Pay a mana, or destroy your creature, which is tough to do if they also have no lands.
Get one of my favorites, the actual card Attrition.
Wait, Attrition is a card?
Yeah, actual literal.
It's one of my
attrition.
favorite
It's
cards.
playable in
It's-
Aristocrat.
Oh,
Yeah.
classic! I
One
forgot
black
about this
black
card.
enchantment. Pay a black, sacrifice a creature, destroy target non-black creature. So it's like great. You're still trading 1 for 1.
Yeah.
But the way you break this is with in some prison decks you go heavy on like the smokestacks theme, so you're making a lot of tokens.
Yeah.
And so you're trading your token for their Tarmogoyf, your token for their big creature.
Well, I mean, the classic sort of creature win con for the style of black deck like that is Nether Spirit. Is that its name?
The one that comes back
Yeah.
in your upkeep if it's the only creature in your graveyard.
Yeah. So 1 black for a 2/2 spirit at the beginning of your upkeep of Nether Spirit is the only creature card in your graveyard. You may return it to play. Now, unfortunately, Nether Spirit not really playable in Highlander, which is tough.
Too many ways to exile it.
Not only too many ways to exile it, but in a 100-card deck, it's not really reliable to ever get it into your bin. I mean, I played
I mean,
60
you're
card
gonna draw it
box.
eventually.
The
I
game's
guess
going
if the game-
100 turns.
If the game goes long enough, you'll eventually
it's
draw
great with
another.
the anvil lock.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
You're just like, eventually I'm gonna bin this Nether Spirit and then you're dead.
and then I'm gonna kill you with it. But then it's in like your bottom 10 and you just like can't actually clock them fast enough.
Oh, they've dealt themselves at least like 4. So
Yeah.
it needs to be in the bottom 8.
Yeah, when you got your Zozu and your Ankh of Mishra, they're already low enough that you only have to hit them twice with Nether Spirit.
Playing Zozu and Ankh of Mishra in prison?
Oh yeah, man! In my red-white builds, that's the extra spice. That
What
little
if
bit
you
of
play
picante.
against a red deck?
Don't even worry about it. No, you're just super dead against the red deck.
One of my one of the locks I was talking about with a friend of the show, Chris.
Yeah.
That definitely is hostile to creatures. Is the old Humility Power Stone Minefield
Oh,
convention.
classic.
That's the classic Chris lock.
Yeah, so Humility, a 4-mana white enchantment for 2 white that says all creatures lose all abilities and become 1/1s. And then Power Stone Minefield is a 4-mana red-white enchantment for 2 red-white that says whenever a creature attacks or blocks, they take 2 damage. So you're like, your creatures, they do nothing.
Well, they can't attack, that's for sure.
Or
Yeah.
block.
Or
Or
block.
have abilities.
One
Pretty
thing that you'll
useless.
notice is a common trend in all these cards we've talked about. Not a whole lot of them are cheap, which
Yeah.
means that basically all prison decks, this is going to be fairly consistent across all of them, is that they need to have ramp in them.
Yep.
And JR alluded to it where he was talking about the different types of ramp, but you just have to. You can't be planning to cast Humility on turn 4, cast Power Stone Minefield on turn 5. You're gonna die.
You're not playing fair magic here.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. You need to be doing things to accelerate into
Well,
those.
especially against blue decks as well, you need to have something powerful to do on turn 2.
Before them. Yeah,
that's-
before they get the counter spells up.
That's the turn you needed against blue decks. Just like planning to be like, oh, sweet, I have a bunch of sweet, powerful 4-mana spells in the blue decks. Just like
counterspell.
Daze, Force Spike,
Yeah.
Mana Leak.
Well, that actually segues nicely into our final type of attrition. The final way to sort of interact with your opponent is to mess with the converted mana cost of cards. And these are effects that will make spells more expensive or disruptive in some
So
way.
not the converted mana cost, just the cost of spells.
Sure, pardon me, of
Yeah.
course. Of course. So an example of that would be the card Trinisphere, Trini. Trinisphere is a 3-mana artifact that says, as long as Trinisphere is untapped, which is more relevant than you'd think, each spell that would cost less than 3 mana to play now costs 3. So, like, nice days there.
Yeah, exactly.
I've
Yeah.
always been curious what the Tobago sphere would be like. I don't know. No, Trinidad and Tobago. You haven't heard? Sorry.
In my head, I was like, Tobago, is that 4? Like,
Look,
what language? What language?
I'm going to admit, I spent far too long preparing that joke because I knew we were going to talk about Trinisphere. I was certain it was going to happen.
Yeah, Into the Sea with Liam. No.
That's an island.
That's fun and stuff like that. So that sort of covers most of the things that a prison-style deck is going to try and interact with. Your hand, your land, your creatures, or the cost of spells are sort of the classic log pieces.
I actually have a question because
Yo.
we sort of talked about it very briefly, but you were talking about cards like Ankh of Mishra and Zozu. Is your opponent's life total something that you're attacking with prison ever, or like you're ever trying to make it so that it's like painful to play the game? Okay, so
it's interesting. Like the way I play prison, and correct me if you have different experiences here. Strategy 1 is don't lose. It's not how do I win, it's how do I not lose.
Right.
Which is basically like, how do I disrupt my opponent's win strategy and take them out of the game And then step 2 is, okay, great, now that that's done, now can I win?
Right.
And so Ankh is sort of this really weird card that, how do I evaluate that card? Often it sucks.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like it fits into that definition of how you want the games to go.
It sort of says your opponent can only play 10 lands this game. So if you're destroying their lands a lot, like that's relevant, and it's really vicious against fetch lands in particular.
It is. I often use it as a way against control to make it tough for them, because if you're playing a land denial style deck, which is almost exclusively green-black or red-white ramp, you want to take out their lands and then punish them when they try and rebuild their board afterwards.
Okay.
And that's one of the ways I've thought about it, and it's tough because it's not a lock piece. It doesn't actually dissuade them from doing anything, especially if they kill you ahead of time. And it's a sort of an awkward win con afterwards, but it has that mean spirit of the prison, you know?
I mean, and it is sort of a lock piece, right? Because it does limit the number of lands that they can play. Eventually, it's just the one awkward thing is that the prison deck does not do an especially good job of leveraging the life total advantage that you're going to generate from it, right? Like, 1 is not 0 is maybe the most like true against prison, where like if you're not actually dead, they're not going to kill you out of nowhere very often.
Yeah, the difficult thing in evaluating every card in prison when you're building it, we can try and include this conversation when we get into the topic of different types of prison, is how badly do I hose myself off my own lock pieces? Really, right? Like the number of times that I've played a basic tax effect, help me out, one of the 2-mana stones.
Sphere of Resistance.
Like Sphere of Resistance. So Sphere of Resistance is a 2-mana artifact that makes everything, all spells cost 1 more. And I'm like, great, I'm going to play this on turn 2, I'm going to ramp through it, it's not going to matter, because I went like turn 1, land, Sol Ring, Sphere of Resistance, this is great. And then they play a creature or 2, and now I have 6 mana to cast my Wildfire, but I need 7. And I'm sitting there, and while my opponent stumbled a little bit to play 2 creatures, they still played 2 creatures, and I'm just dead here because I can't actually cast my 6-drop spell. So that is the constant struggle you find with these effects. So like Ankh Mishra, great. I've dealt 8 damage to my opponent. All their fetch lands suck. I'm still dead.
Right, because it's symmetrical too, right?
Yeah.
You can't play that many more lands either.
Yeah, and that's sort of always been the reason why I've never done well with prison.
Is there some way we can force people to put lands into play with Ankh in play? Sorry, that's not a prison strategy.
Whoa, what's that green spell?
There's Veteran Explorer.
Yeah.
Well, that's only 2.
Is it in May, or do they have to do it?
No, it's a May.
It's a May.
Oh, man.
I mean, you can Field of Ruin people. That's still
they
not
can
good
still
enough.
fill the find.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They can always choose to not, like, hey, sorry, I'm all out of basics. And you're like, damn.
What about like?
And then they play a Swamp next.
What about like Warp Worlding? Does that work?
You might also die.
Yeah.
You might also just die.
That sounds excellent.
But then we're playing Warp World, and we have far bigger problems.
Actually, Warp World might not be terrible, because you're going to have all these giant, dirtily, like, 8-mana spells anyways. Oh, his eyebrow actually twitched. We actually made his eyebrow twitch. I'm so sorry. It's my first day back, and I actually hurt Jer.
I'm not. Don't worry.
All right, let's circle back to types of prison.
Oh, no.
And this is a massive oversimplification, but I always like to think of prison as sort of like, are you a tax deck? Are you a pox deck? Or are you like a rampy wildfire style deck? I think are sort of like the 3 main strategies to play. So the tax deck is the classic, I think of them as blue or white style decks. So Propaganda is a very classic tax style effect. It's a 3-mana blue enchantment for 2 and a blue that just says creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each attacking creature. And the style of deck there is you make yourself a pillow fort. You make yourself a nice, cozy little home behind all of your enchantments and all your stuff where you're like, good, I'm safe now. They can't do anything. A Pox style deck is the one where instead of building up your board, you constantly start limiting the number of things that exist. So nobody has a hand, nobody has lands, nobody has creatures. And that's a style of deck that you'll see Nether Spirit in. So Smallpox into Nether Spirit. And as Liam was saying, how do you break how do you break the lock in that deck? Well, you have to use your resources interesting ways. You need to leverage your graveyard. You need some way to do it. And then the final style I have is the Wildfire Deck, which is probably my favorite style. So Wildfire is a 6-mana spell that will destroy all the creatures and stuff. So in this strategy, you often go with a lot of very cheap accelerants and then explode the board. And your win cons with that are normally, I don't know, Painter Servant?
Dragons.
Really? You play dragons in the Wildfire deck?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the most popular Wildfire deck is Big Red, and then you're just like sort of playing like
Planeswalkers.
half. You're sort of like a big mid-range or control deck.
Yeah.
Like not necessarily Prison, but it's probably the most successful Wildfire deck we have in the format.
Yeah.
It's just like
Yeah, like Big Idiot Dragons is just like the other name for that deck too. Like
yeah.
But that's not a Prison deck. That's just a ramp deck. Let's talk about the Prison version.
No. Like it's a Prison
really?
deck. Yeah. Like the plan is like turn 1 Trinisphere, turn 3 Dragon, kill you.
Or it's playing Blood Moons,
Yeah.
Trinispheres, other spheres.
It's like not playing as many lock pieces, but
Sure.
it's playing
Disruption
more,
and
more
win cons.
more speed bumps than lock pieces, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean it's like I've definitely watched Matt in 3 consecutive games go turn 1 Trinisphere in game 1. He won that game. Then he played turn 1 Blood Moon in game 2. He lost that game. Then he played turn 1 Magus of the Moon in game 3, and he won that game. And he was just like hard mulliganing for like soul lands and Simian Spirit Guides and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, the mulling in this deck. I mean, the one big issue I've had when playing a Wildfire style deck is, it's so wildly inconsistent. You're just like, I have all ramp and no top end. I have all top end and no ramp.
I mean, Prison decks in general are typically not the most consistent.
Yeah.
Just because you have so many cards that do different things, and you're not typically able to play any sort of like deck filtration because it's usually
Red.
cheap spells, and you're not necessarily in the deck filtration colors, but you usually don't want to have too many cheap spells in your deck because those are the kinds of things you're trying to hate out. So as you were talking earlier, you don't want to make your taxation effects too impactful to your own game plan.
Yeah, the mulliganing on that's kind of great. So we've talked about types of attrition. We've talked about types of prison. How do you actually win? And I love my notes on here. It's just like, how do you win? It's just like ...
Yeah, many ellipses. ...
an entire blank line, and it's just like Planeswalkers?
Yeah, that's typically one of the better ways to win in Prison, just because they don't typically get interacted with the easiest. It's easy for them to sit there under your taxation effects and just like slowly win the game, because you're trying to draw out these games, and one of the best things to have in play during a drawn out game is a Planeswalker.
They generate so much card advantage. And again, if you're looking at the types of attrition, hand, land, creatures, and the cost of spells, and the effects we're talking about, Wildfire destroys lands and creatures, Smallpox destroys lands, creatures, and hands and spell. Planeswalkers, and then also the enchantments and artifacts that we've mentioned a lot here, they survive all those effects. So the sorts of things that you can play while hating out your opponent's strategies are great to win there. The other way that I've typically won in the past is through combo. And you see that in a sort of like the Legacy Wildfire version as well. Painter's Servant and Grindstone. There's a lot of natural synergy in the red-white version of the Wildfire deck help me out. Imperial Recruiter.
Yeah, you have ways to find these combos because you're looking to tutor for artifacts. Anyway, Imperial Recruiter is like a card that finds Magus of the Moon and a way to win the game.
Yeah.
In Legacy, it's a similar idea too, right? You're Imperial Recruiting for Maguses, and then eventually you're Grindstoning. I think in Legacy, the Grindstone decks tend to be a little more combo-oriented and slightly less like lockout-oriented, but it's a similar idea.
Well, yeah, like, I don't know. They're just trying to lock you out with, like, exactly Blood Moon is their plan.
Yeah, like you always
it's
want
much better
turn
to be
Blood
on
Moon.
that plan.
Yeah,
Legacy.
sometimes they have one Ensnaring Bridge main, but, like, it's just, like, the diversity of their lock pieces are obviously much narrower in Legacy than in Highlander, just because they get to play 4 Blood Moons, and the nature of the Legacy format is that Blood Moon often ends the game on the spot when it's resolved.
Yeah, if you can get it on
especially in game 1.
So here's a question for you guys, and evaluating lock pieces that are great in Legacy and not so great in Canadian Highlander. What do you think of XX
Chalice of the Void?
Chalice of the Void?
So I think, yeah, that card's like one of the single best cards in Legacy. It's arguably a pillar. like a pillar of the format right now. Like
you can explain Chalice of the Void real quick?
Yeah, so Chalice of the Void costs XX, which means you have to pay X twice. So you can either cast it for 2 mana to get 1 counter on it, 4 mana to get 2 counters on it, 0 mana to get 0 counters on it. And here's what you get for your mana. Chalice of the Void enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. Whenever a player casts a spell with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Chalice of the Void, counter that spell.
Yeah.
And so what you're trying to do is cast it for 1 on turn 1 with either like a Simian Spirit Guide or a Soul Land or something. And then your opponent's locked out of 1 mana spells. The problem with that in Highlander is that the converted mana cost of decks is much more diverse than it is in Legacy. There are a bunch of decks in Legacy that have 31 drops, 4 2-drops, and then
that's it. Maybe Batterskull.
Yeah, and so you're potentially locking out half of somebody's deck or 33% of somebody's deck with a Chalice on one.
Yeah,
and that makes it really hard for them to play the game. But in Highlander, Burn's got to be the deck with the most 1-drops.
Yeah,
they probably have 30-ish max.
No,
it's tough.
I think it depends on the build, but yeah, like certainly not more than 40.
Okay, yeah, and that's the literal best case scenario.
You're like, maybe against control I can hit 2 and dodge counterspells, but even the counterspells have so much variety in CMC.
Yeah, there's a bunch of 3s and a bunch of 1s.
4s and 5s. I mean, everybody's playing Cryptic, everybody's playing Mystic Confluence. Like, you have so many choices by necessity. So, I don't know. So we're in agreement that it's like, it's sad that classic lock piece just doesn't work in our format.
Really tragic.
What?
it just leads to like some of the most non-games ever. Like I used to play Storm in Legacy, and it was like the most miserable thing to see game 1 because like literally half your sideboard is devoted to beating this 1 card, just because that's how big of a problem it is.
Huh.
Yeah, it's interesting too because there are people who have still played Chalice of the Void.
Yeah,
because
I've tried it.
Yeah, because you can use it as a way to lock out cards that you think are going to matter, and it does let you set up your game plan in a way where you can say like, okay, I'm going to have this like the number I've actually seen it played on the most is 2.
Yeah.
So you'll play Chalice on 2, and then you get to construct your game plan, assuming that those spells aren't going to resolve anymore. Which helps a bunch. Like against the blue decks, even though there are varied counterspells, like hitting 2 is going to hit more of them than any of the other ones. Hitting 2 against a bunch of the creature decks is pretty good, and the most important thing is that hitting 2 against a lot of the combo decks is lights out.
Right.
Because a lot of the really potent combo cards are at 2. So I've seen it certainly like in the era when Lotus DT Storm was one of the better decks. I saw more Chalices because Chalice on 2 was kind of game ending.
And even Chalice on 0 was really good against that deck.
That's true as well. But increasingly now, when you look at the combo decks that are around in the format, it's things like the Academy Ramp deck, where Chalice is actively rancid against that deck. It's just not very good. They have a really varied converted mana cost. Like you play your Chalice on 2, and then your opponent casts their Golem's Eye, and you're just sad, right? Because they're ramping anyway. Like they weren't looking to do things on the cheap. As is. So I don't know. It's an interesting one to bring up for sure.
All right, let's talk about prison matchups. What are the good matchups and the bad matchups? And honestly, I think prison is an archetype that preys on fair decks and loses to unfair decks. What do you think about that evaluation?
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think actually like slower attrition-y combo decks are the best matchups for prison decks.
I mean, I guess RDW is kind of... Do you think if red deck wins as a fair deck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
definitely.
That's the worst matchup. Like
that's a terrible matchup. It's awful. I don't know. I think about like lightning bolt to the face as that's not very fair. Like they're not playing creatures that I can kill. I can't interact with this deck. That's not fair at all.
They're also playing Goblin Guides.
and this clock that they have. That clock isn't fair.
They're playing Jackal Pup.
Yeah. I can't beat that card.
Well, that
doesn't mean it's not fair.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I sort of fall in the middle. I think that prison doesn't have any good matchups. No.
I also think a lot of prison decks, it's just super draw dependent. Their draws vary so widely. Like it's like your good draws where you like have 3 mana on turn 1 and Trinisphere them. You're probably beating any deck.
Yeah.
So when I put together, I had a pretty good run with Mardu Prison for a while. And unfortunately, it coincided with the time that Ben stumbled upon Hoof at the first time when you could still play like Lotus and Hoof as well as Natural Order and a bunch of stuff, and that deck just like crushed everybody. And I had 3 Mondays in a row where I met Ben in the finals and he crushed me. And I was just like, I'm in Mardu. Like, this should be a good matchup for me. I have Pyroclasm to kill all of his elves. I have Wildfire to kill all of his elves. I have Wrath of God to kill all of his elves.
Wildfire is the best card against Hoof.
And how does he beat Humility? The answer is he can beat Humility. No, he had one out and he got it, which is
Primal Command.
Primal Command. I mean, Jared has no-scoped the answer there. He's like, I knew exactly what it was.
Well, it's the only non-creature answer that they really play.
I've played a lot of Crater Hoof.
Yeah, and I thought that, like, that deck wants to play against the creature deck, provided it's not Burn. Like, Burn is kind of tough. I mean, if you get your Leyline of Sanctity out, you're, like, not just straight dead to red, but it's kind of tough.
The real answer is Rune of Protection red. That's the hot tag.
You know what's interesting? I thought about Rune of Protection red for a while there. So it's a 2-mana enchantment.
For 1 and a white.
For 1 and a white that says, pay a white, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you from a red source, or if you don't play against the red deck, you can cycle it for 2. And I've owned this card. I actually have Rune of Protection for everything when I was really going deep down the prison rabbit hole there, and it just never made it in.
Yeah, clearly you needed Rune of Protection green. Stop dying to this Crater Hoof.
You know the card that I played over it was Story Circle.
Story Circle's a good one?
Yeah, Story Circle, 3-mana enchantment for white, or 2 and a white. Oh, 1 white, pardon me. You choose the color, and then white, you can prevent it. I thought it was a little bit more versatile. And actually, you know the best card that you're not playing that I should have named? Aura of Silence.
That card is really sweet.
Aura of Silence, I think, is another very classic white prison card. Just 1 white. Artifacts and enchantment spells your opponent casts cost 2 more, and you can sack it to disenchant something.
I really love this design. The design that, like, you play it, it has an effect, and you can sacrifice it for a potentially better effect, but then you lose the static ability. I just really appreciate that design.
Yeah, this card is an all-star if you're in a white-based version. So what do you think the good matchups are? I mean, I said Hoof, I said creature decks. Liam said nothing.
No, I mean, that's not what I actually meant.
I sort of cut him off.
I think the combo decks are some of the better matchups, just because a lot of times the permanent-based hate is the hardest to beat.
Yeah.
So the combo decks are like set up, many of them at least, are set up to play through like hand attack and counter spells by being threat dense. But if you just make it so that it's really hard to cast spells, it gets way more difficult. So like playing like Storm or Tin Fins or High Tide, like all of these decks really don't want to sit down across from Prison, because as soon as something like a Lodestone Golem or a Sphere of Resistance resolves, that's going to be challenging. Getting your lands attacked in combo is pretty obnoxious. You don't really care about the creature stuff, but like your hand, your lands, and your converted mana cost, or your mana costs all matter a bunch.
Yeah.
So I think those matchups are some of the better ones. But I actually agree with Jer. I think that the prison decks are actually like maybe some of the more high rolly decks in the format. Like you're sort of like, if you're planning to try and win with prison, you're trying to win a tournament, like you are planning to just not draw someone at least once a tournament, right? Because
we got to dodge your bad matchups. You really
or
but
draw
what
them,
we're
right?
saying is like, we're saying the matchups don't really so much matter, is like you just have to not beat yourself.
Yeah.
Like you just have to draw well.
Like I think that Prison has a few, like I think actually Prison has a bunch of like 55-45 and 45-55 matchups, but they're really draw dependent. And so,
but yeah,
I think the games can feel not close, but the matchup is actually, I think, closer.
I think Prison, more than almost any other archetype, suffers from just drawing the wrong half of their deck.
Yeah.
Like if you draw like all the tax effects against the aggro deck, you're not going to win. If you draw all the wraths against the combo deck, you're not going to win. But if you draw the creature hate against the creature deck and draw the tax effects against the combo deck, like
yeah, and you're just signing up for that when you do it, right? Yeah. Like when you put this deck together, you're saying like, well, I hope I draw good today.
You guys are reminding me all the reasons why I stopped playing Prison, and I want to sleeve it back up, and I'm like, oh, right, those sevens you draw. Prison's one of those archetypes. You draw a hand, and you're like, nobody can beat this, and then you draw a hand, and you're just like, why did I make this deck?
Yeah, I mean, to Prison's credit, like the sevens might look horrible, but some of the fives look great.
Yeah.
So it's a deck that can mulligan, right? Like because you are doing something so powerful so early, you can afford to mulligan low because turn 1 Turnisphere is still game ending against a lot of decks if you get to set it up with something like an Ancient Tomb or something of that ilk.
Well, let's go. Why play Prison? And I think one of the first things to talk about in there is the ability to metagame. If you have a solid read on what it is, and you're talking about like, hey, I don't want to draw my Wrath against this deck. I don't want to draw my Lock Piece against this deck. If you can zero in on what you're going to face, God, Prison can be miserable if you tune it in against the right matchup.
Yep.
Like I was saying, there's no world in which Ben is supposed to beat me 3 finals in a row with Mardu, Prison versus Hoof when it's been like tailored to beat there. I mean, that's credit to him and probably shame on me, but so it goes.
I mean, it's also just like you can draw badly. Like that's as we were saying, that's the way that the Prison deck works. I agree though, when you get to have a read on the metagame, or maybe it's a more predictable metagame, Prison can be a strong way to go. Like I was saying, when Storm was the best deck, that's actually when we saw more people picking up more Prison-esque strategies because you could choose to target that deck and you knew it was going to be a reasonable matchup. I think one of the other interesting things with metagaming with Prison is like, at least in some of like the more blue artifact-based Prison decks, like you're getting increasingly more and more tutors as they either come off the points list or as WotC decides to point cards like War of Invention and Adventurer's Fair.
Really cool
and
effects.
so all of a sudden you get to make your deck have a few more silver bullets, but you don't have to play quite as many. So you maybe don't have to look to play as many Wraths because you can use your tutors to find your Ensnaring Bridge or your Trinisphere or what have you. These powerful lock pieces we've been talking about, which I think is like pretty relevant as well.
I think if I were going to build Prison again right now, it'd probably be blue-based. And sort of like a weird Academy hybrid that also tries to ramp into Wildfire. Because, blue, it's funny because it folds to its own tax effects, but it finds them super easily. So you find this weird, maybe you just ramp through it so heavily you just don't care anymore.
I think the printing of Karn Scion Evers is a huge boon to these decks as well. It goes into almost every single one, and that card is
the stone cold.
Busted.
Man. Sorry, the other best card you're not playing, God, I'm in my pet archetype right now, is actually original Karn. Karn the creature, not even the planeswalker at all.
Silver Golem.
No.
Karn the Silver Golem. I love this card in Prison. It's so good.
The Mox Murderer.
I'm just not sure it does enough.
Well, it used to before, cards got better, but it's a 5-mana creature. It's a 4/4 legendary artifact. Whenever it becomes blocked or blocks, it gets -4/+4 until end of turn, so it turns into a 0/8. But the ability you actually care about is for 1 mana, target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. Mox killer. So if they have artifact lands or Moxen in play, you turn them into 0/0s and they all die. But the main thing you do with this is you turn your Staff of Nin into a win con. Oh, I'm just thinking, at first I was worried because I've been on the road for so long that I wouldn't have any powerful Magic stories. And now that I'm talking about these cards, I've got so many stories. So many stories. That's fine. I'll write them down so I can talk about them at another time and stuff like that.
Yeah, it does feel like you're having a real flood of recollection.
Yeah, this is why I play Prison, is you get to have these powerful, weird effects. You get to play these funky, weirdo cards. You never get to do anything in there. And think about in what world is a 5-mana 4/4 the best card in your deck? Jared would argue never.
No,
I would say...
I would also argue never.
It's not.
Like, that card's acceptable, but it's definitely not the best card in your deck.
Never was.
You're playing Soul Ring.
Yeah.
And then you can make Soul Ring the 1/1.
That's not good. Then they can kill your Soul Ring with anything. Literally anything.
Have you ever had your Soul Ring, is it Staticaster? I haven't, but that just does not sound pleasant.
They could fungal infection your Soul Ring.
I see. Dominaria Draft All-Star Fungal Infection.
Oh, that card was really good.
Yeah.
No. All right. I will tell a powerful Magic story just so you can learn how sweet Karn is. So I have Karn Silver Golem in play.
Right.
And my opponent...
Is it Karn the Silver Golem or
it's
just
Karn Silver?
Karn, Silver Golem.
All right, it's just an epithet. Sounds
and
good.
then my opponent plays Vidalcan Shackles.
Oh God, this sounds like a Memnon problem all over
again. I took
again.
this judge call.
Yeah. Maybe not. And I go to attack. And then in my pre-combat main phase, whatever like that, I animate one of my creatures, one of my artifacts, animate one of my artifacts, animate one of my artifacts, I'm going to attack. And then before I go to combat, I'm like, and I'm going to animate your shackles. And then they're like, okay. And I'm like, do you have a response? And they're like, no. And I'm like, ha ha ha. Go to attacks. And they're like, okay, activate shackles. I'm like, sorry, you can't. Shackles is now a creature and it has summoning sickness. You can't use its tap ability. And they're like, whoa! That's sweet. Come on. No?
I mean, this really does embody the whole Magic is a zero-sum game, kind of like with regards to fun. Like you were like, if we had an advantage bar, that was fun, and Serge was here, and your opponent was over here. I mean, you are having all the fun currently.
I don't know. I thought that was a beautiful interaction.
That is sweet. I mean, that's super powerful. It does like force them to make a choice before you actually attack. Which is definitely good.
Yeah, and then maybe they can block with a 3/3, and then you just get to get rid of their shackles in that case.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and you can always use Karn when you're going to Wrath. You can just like animate all their artifacts and then Wrath their board.
But what if other people aren't playing artifacts? I guess then your artifact, you're animating your own.
The only deck that's not playing other artifacts is Blue Moon, and screw that deck.
That's not true.
That's not true at all. There are not very many artifacts in the format right now. No,
because everyone has artifact hate to kill Platinum Imperium, so the cost of putting artifacts in your deck right now is
as high as possible.
Is pretty high. They need to be super high impact in order to do it.
It's really killing my efforts at building Owling Mine. Very aggravating.
Somebody won the last 2 tournaments before this last Monday with Academy combo.
Huh.
People are still trying to hate on the Blue Moon. So
interesting.
Yeah, Molder Slug is probably coming back out soon. That's all I'm saying.
I don't even know what Molder Slug is.
We'll find out in a second here.
How do you spell it?
Mirrodin Standard All-Star.
Molder Slug is a 5-mana 4/6 green creature for 3 green. It's a beast. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, they sacrifice an artifact.
So when I first moved to Victoria, Academy was also the best deck.
Okay.
And this is like the first powerful Magic story I literally ever heard. It was like the first Monday tournament I was at, and round 1 finished. And Nick walks up to me. This is actually the guy who won the last 2 Mondays. The same person was playing Academy 3 years ago. And he looks at me and he says, Doug, turn 2 Molder Slugged me on his Academy deck, and he did not win. I actually don't know how this Molder Slug got cast on turn 2. I also didn't know what the card did until just now, but I assumed it was bad. At the time, I just kind of smiled and nodded. But, it didn't seem good.
Of all the artifact hate to play a 5-mana 4/6?
That doesn't even do it immediately.
No.
Look, times were different back then. Also, this does at least recurredly kill an artifact of their choice.
Yeah.
Each player's, it's symmetrical.
Well, sure, you're not playing any artifacts, though.
Yeah, you're playing Molder Slug. But in Standard, this was the classic hate card for Affinity, and it was just way too slow. Well, you also played Oxidize, and you played, every shatter in the format and still just died on turn 2.
Huh.
It was brutal.
It was not pleasant.
All right, well...
Horrendous.
Wow. All right, apparently I have to make molderslug.deck now. All right, let's talk about this. Any sort of conclusions on Prison?
Conclusions on Prison, eh?
Yeah.
All right.
We talked about why play it,
Ian's like, man, I got to get all my jokes out now.
No. I used all my jokes. I didn't have that many. Yeah. There was a Tortuga joke, but it didn't come up.
Jesus.
We didn't end up talking about coastal piracy.
What's coastal piracy?
That's not a Prison card.
I know. I just thought there was a chance we might.
What?
Look, you got to be prepared for everything.
About Ophidian.deck.
Coastal piracy, 4-mana enchantment. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage, draw a card. How does that go in Prison?
Look,
why wouldn't you play?
Well, we set you up now, so you gotta tell it.
It's too late. I already ruined the joke. It doesn't work.
What was the joke?
I was gonna make some joke about shipping off to the port of Tortuga. I figured. Look, I made the joke about Trinidad and Tobago. I thought we might start talking about Caribbean islands. There was a chance we'd go down that path.
You lined everything up.
Well, you know how sometimes you sit there and you imagine how conversations might go in social situations you'll never be in? I do that a lot, but with jokes. A lot of jokes that just never come up because no one ever says the perfect 6-word setup line I need. On the other hand, Corey's jokes seem to hit every time without the use of speech. It's pretty impressive. So the reasons to play Prison, and final conclusions on Prison. I think Prison is an archetype that is very polarizing, much like Combo. You either love it or you hate it.
Yeah.
And I think that if you love it, you should play Prison, because if that's how you find fun, great. Magic is designed so that, we're trying to win a game, and if this is the way that you want to win the game, this is the way that you find it enjoyable, that you find enjoyment, great, do it. Be prepared for some frustrating losses and some pretty epic wins, I think is what I would say. You're gonna lose games that you feel like there's no way you could possibly lose, and you're gonna win games that you feel like there's no way you could possibly win.
That's totally fair. Yeah.
So it's a bit of a roller coaster, not quite the ultimate roller coaster. You don't have Heartbeat of Spring in your deck, but
what is the ultimate roller coaster?
It's the 5-color Heartbeat of Spring Storm. It's like High Tide, but worse. So Heartbeat of Spring is a mana doubler, and all you do is you play as many mana doublers as possible, then some untappers and draw 7s, and hope to eventually kill them.
It sounds a lot like Enchantress. Like a lot like Enchantress.
In the sense that it's not very good, or what?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, in the sense that you could have a turn where you draw 20 cards and untap with 100 mana and still do nothing.
Oh, yes. Actually, that's about right.
And then you double is easily like 3 tiers above this deck.
Yeah.
All right, my conclusion on Prison, if you want to play a completely different type of Magic, if you want to look at what your opponent's doing and just be like, nah, dog, I got my own game over here, and basically disrupt your opponent's strategy in the least interactive way possible, because that's the whole point, is you're not
most interactive for you, but least interactive for them.
Yeah, that's a good way of doing that. You interact a lot, but in a weird way.
Prison is definitely like zero fun sum Magic
zero
incarnate.
Sum fun. Yeah.
I have been told I'm the nicest person who'll ever strip mine lock.
Oh, that's absolutely true. That's the infuriating thing, actually. It's like you play against Serge and he's doing things where you just should be mad. It's you and Adam both are like the 2 most prominent Prison players in Victoria, and you're also the 2 nicest Magic players in Victoria, which makes it incredibly aggravating.
That's why Liam and I can't play Prison.
No, it just wouldn't stand.
We'd be lynched.
Maybe not that bad, but yeah, like you or Adam will be sitting there being like, oh, nice, Crucible of Worlds, all right, I'm going to strip mine you. And then you're like sitting there being like, I should be angry, and yet I feel like it would be wrong to be angry, so I can't. I just won't be angry.
They're just so excited. They're like, strip mine you again for the 6th turn in a row, and they're still just so excited. And you're just like...
And the biggest problem is that you're like that when you're killing us, but you're also like that when we're killing you, and that's why you can't get mad, is because, I had a turn against you. Yeah, exactly. I had a turn against you where I, had Paradox Engine in play, and I took 25 minutes to find a way to kill you, and you were like, all right, great, thanks for the game, Liam, that was awesome. And I was like, what? All right, that's my conclusion on Prison.
All right, well, then let's go to our ending segment, as we always do. I'm back. Time for Powerful Magic. Oh, I missed that. And up today, we have Jer. Jer, tell us a story.
So thankfully, I have a good, powerful Magic story. I managed to win a tournament the other day.
Hey, right on.
With the classic Tier 1 staple Mono Green Stomping.
Not a Tier 1 deck.
Mono Green Stomping.
Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
No, sometimes
Tier 1.
Play Forest and turn creatures sideways.
Play Prison at all. It was play Black Lotus. That was the real power.
Yeah, I drew Black Lotus a few times over the night, and my powerful Magic story comes with the aid of Black Lotus.
Okay.
So I'm playing against the classic, the greenest mage of them all in our local scene, Noel, Pro Tour competitor.
Day 2 Pro Tour competitor.
Yeah, right. And he's playing a black-red Wildfire deck. I was able to sneak game 1 with the help of his deck not giving him anything ever. I was stuck on 2 lands forever. And
you got more than 2 lands against Black-Red Wildfire?
He had all the mana in the world, had 2 Planeswalkers in play, and then just bricked off and died. That
sounds like Prison.
Shout out to Noel's deck. Definitely MVP of game 1. But in game 2, he didn't have much of a chance. I mulliganed the first 6, and my hand is land, Chrome Mox, irrelevant green card that gets imprinted under Chrome Mox, Steel Leaf Champion, Black Lotus.
For those of you counting at home, you can play all of these.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, and there's Sylvan Library in there somewhere.
Which one is Steel Leaf Champion? Oh,
maybe there's only 1 land. So I'm on my turn 1. I'm able to play land, Chrome Mox, exile the irrelevant green card, play Sylvan Library, and he's like, okay, that's a pretty good turn. I'm like,
It's
But
not
wait,
over
there's
yet.
more.
Oh no.
Black Lotus, make green, Steel Leaf champion, your turn.
What do you do?
So you have to deal with a 5/4 on turn 1, and then at my next turn, before looking at the cards, I just said pay 8 life. I just drew 3.
Oh, the mind game.
I mean, it's also just like...
Correct.
Yeah. It's probably just the right choice. You just need to get some cards. Gotta hit your 3rd land drop, you know?
Oh, I forgot how good Steel Leaf Champion is.
Well, this card's brand new. It's from Dominaria.
It's real good.
It does seem
Especially
very
on
powerful.
turn 1. Highly recommend. Would do again.
Holy moly.
Yeah. And so Noel felt very conflicted. I could see he was like excited that like green was triumphing, but he was on the losing end, which is unusual for him. He's usually the green mage triumphing.
Oh man, I remember playing him in the Selesnya mirror, and he just crushed me. And just like looking at each other's decks, just like, yeah, you just everything about you is better than me in every measurable respect. Your creature choices, your deck building, the way you played.
If there's a guy I don't want to sit down into like against to fight a like green mid-range creature mirror, holy crap, is it him?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all right, that about does it for our episode today. God, I'm still 5/4 on turn 1.
It's very good.
You just shocked me.
With Sylvan Library.
Powerful magic. Yeah, and the Sylvan Library, sure.
The icing on the cake.
When turn 1 Sylvan Library is like, you know, sure, whatever.
The forgettable part.
Yeah.
Holy moly. All right, whatever. That's our episode for today. It's good to be back, and it's good to talk about prison. Yeah, thank you very much for setting me up for my favorite archetype on my first episode back.
We felt like you needed the softball, you know? It was,
just like... No.
The reviews were, they were like, well, Liam and Jared, pretty good show. Probably fine with just the two now.
Don't really even remember what it was like when there were other people on it. The quality sure has gone up these past couple weeks.
There were suspicions that we were going to lose a person every week, and so like they thought last week's episode was just going to be me shuffling cards for an hour.
Just ASMR style.
Yeah, just like next to a microphone.
Just looking into the camera.
Although I don't actually think that would be pleasant for like 99% of Magic players. Like I massacre cards.
He does. It's bad.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
All
Sorry,
right.
I digress.
So thank you so much to everybody for tuning in. Thank you so much to Liam and Jared for doing such a great job while we're out of town. I think I looked at the wrong person as I said the names.
That's all right. Our names are interchangeable at this point.
Yeah, see how it goes. And thank you to everybody for your support. And a reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon at patreon.com/LoadingReadyRun. And as always, we didn't really talk about any deck lists, but we'll throw some.
Bye!
See ya.